about some recent trends you've seen in your space. And I'm thinking MSPs, contingent programs. Is there anything that's topical, anything that's happening, anything that's dynamic in the news?
Well, the buzz around direct sourcing and building talent pools is still there, but I think the froth once again has come off of that with
Yeah.
the economic cycle. So, still looking at direct sourcing, but what was really pushing it last year was access to finding talent and really taking charge of your talent acquisition process yourselves, right? Not only just always leaving it to third-party recruitment companies. And so this year, because the demand isn't as great, we've seen a little bit of slowdown in the demand for direct sourcing programs, even though this is the time they should be looking at it because the laid off resources typically weren't available and looking for
Yeah.
work in the past. And so to engage with those types of workers, you wouldn't have been able to bring them into your talent pool for future needs. So I always say, you should be anti-cyclical, but a lot of companies just are what they are and they go with the cycles. So the demand for direct sourcing has come off a little bit, but it's still there because it's seen as a cost savings measure, right? If you can directly source and source your talent and run them through, say, an EOR company or directly on your own payroll or through your AP department, you have a savings of what the margin from a recruitment agency would be. So there's different reasons for direct sourcing in this kind of coming into this economic cycle. But the trend to utilize third parties to centralize the management of their contingent workforce and the whole idea of total talent management and acquisition is coming into the realms as well. We're seeing that as a hot topic, which blends the workforce when you think about it, where you traditionally had, FTEs through HR and contingent through procurement. Now you're seeing more of that. Hey, how do we work together and have a holistic view of your workforce and how work is getting done between, your full-time, your contingent workers, and even some of your outsourced providers. So there's these discussions going on and trends, I would say, and topics that are being bantered, but a lot of has remained the same. And as we go into economic cycles, what you find is people retrench back and they think about cost savings again, right? And how do we get the resources we need to maintain the ship while we cruise through what we think is going to be a recession, right?
And have you seen any trends, any movement in leadership or any disruption in that space? Any of the incumbents that have been either disrupted or that have grown because of this or consolidated, or do you see any M&A activity? This is something we're thinking and seeing and feeling is as things tighten, right, as competition increases, there's likely to be some activity. So I'm wondering in your space, what you've seen, because you guys in North America, you like acquiring and selling and buying, right? So
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because in the space there was a lot of acquisition activity in the high times, a lot of money flowing into our market. And so the last couple of years it was acquisition central. With the headwinds that people are predicting, that's slowed. And quite honestly, when you look at some of the froth that's come off the money markets, valuations have come back to reality a little bit, even though no one wants to admit it. And then that's changed some of the leadership, right? So I know we've had some changes at Magnet, which is one of the large kind of MSP programs, and Teresa Carroll, formerly from Kelly, has taken the helm there, which is a great opportunity. So I think a lot of the investment activity, M&A activity that just was rampant over the last 3 years are now during the tougher times actually has to settle out. And then you'll start seeing it again once things settle out, right? And winners and losers start to happen in the market, which I don't think is really settled out yet. But you're seeing some of that settlement and some of the changes at the realm of some of the organizations that haven't shown the revenue growth or whatever that was expected when the investors invested, right?
yeah, I mean, certainly in the employer of record space, which is garnered so much attention, right, in the last 4 years. The amount of money that was injected based on pretty phenomenal growth rates on an annual basis, because it's clearly growing a outsourced employment workforce on an annual basis when remote work booming is pretty sexy to VC companies, and a lot of money was driven in. But what we've seen is, with the suppression in the market and some of the lack of startups that fueled that boom, because it was startup heavy as opposed to MNCs and larger organizations, I just wonder, valuation wise, you wouldn't feel good about investing money in these types of companies at this point of the cycle because of the recent valuation. So some of the investors are going to be underwater. These products, certainly from an employment perspective, because it is service driven, there is no, or not necessarily the scale, right? It's not a zero marginal cost of replication business. You can't really bring the supply side, supply cost down and demand cost down to that point. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next year as things continue to toughen slightly and the competition is going to come in, because we all need to grow, right, in the market, and we need to succeed. So that's going to be an interesting trend. We've seen some changes in some of the bigger companies at the CEO level recently as well, which is kind of telling, right? It's kind of telling. Some people come back to the fore to run the ship, which again is telling. So I think it's going to be an interesting period for us to observe. But nonetheless, the market is still young that we're in. The global talent acquisition market is fledgling still. It's not particularly well understood by HR decision makers all around the world. So I don't see, the aggregate market will keep growing. The pie will grow, but there's more people wanting a piece of the pie.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting market from the business aspect, from who the players are and how that interchanges. Let's talk about trends. So, there's a lot of changes in regulatory issues around the gig economy, and with remote work, it's created digital nomads and all of things like that. Like, I know you're seeing different trends in the marketplace when it comes to this, especially in favorable climate jurisdictions and favorable like vacation type jurisdictions where people want to work remotely and then have a really nice work-life balance, and also cost of living, right? They'll move to lower cost of living areas, work remotely, back to their old clients or whatever, earn the same but have a lower cost of living because they're working remotely. Some of those trends, but what's the difference between a digital nomad and a digital migrant?
Sure. Well, actually, I think I did an article very recently on this, and only because it's something that comes out every day. We see it on LinkedIn, and we have clients ask us and workers ask us. And actually, I'll give a shout out. There's a company that I like, John Lee from Work From Anywhere. I think they put out some really good content around these premises and these types of trends. So EOR, IC, Nomads, what it all means, how you work, remote workers, etc. So I'll give that a shout out. Digital nomad is typically someone that is, and it's quite glamorized, right? How many times you've seen on LinkedIn a post with someone with a laptop overlooking Niagara Falls or the Costa Rica or some beach? I still don't know how they did their work on the beach, but that's another thing. Or playing with elephants and still got their laptop. That's nonsense. So digital nomad is typically someone hopping from location to location, more from a life experience, flexibility perspective, but they're not staying in locations for very long, right? They might do a couple of months in Thailand, they might go to South Africa in the summer, that's great. But in terms from a taxation perspective, you're going to be looking at where they are a tax resident, where they are spending more than 183 days of the year. That's where they're tax resident. Digital migrant, on the other hand, is someone like me. So I left Switzerland to go to Dubai. I like the sun, and I think the Middle East is very interesting. We can talk about that another time. But ultimately, I'm uplifting my family. I'm leaving one country, cutting all economic ties, moving to another country. I've become a tax resident, and I pay tax in that country. Governments are looking to bring on digital migrants because that contributes longer term to their economy. It contributes towards social security revenue, taxation revenue for aging populations. Whereas digital nomads is still interesting because they bring a lot to the locations they're going. It could be buying goods and services, putting money into local communities. But I'd say there's quite a big difference. And
Yeah,
there's
it's
a
almost
lot of
like the
misconceptions.
digital nomads are tourists, right? And they're there
Pretty much.
spending tourist dollars, going to restaurants and that kind of thing, potentially staying in hotels longer term or Airbnbs or whatever. Um, Whereas the migrants are actually migrating. And you mentioned once again what is almost a global number, 183 days or just over 6 months, right? So if you
Yeah,
spend
typically.
more than half of your time in a jurisdiction, it turns to be more of a tax residency
Tax
scenario.
residency, sure. Um, and we've seen huge trends of people looking to leave a particular country and go elsewhere. And not just from country to country. We've seen it from a North American perspective. How many people we've seen move from one state to another? And in America, the states compete almost like from a country perspective. So Florida is very different from Texas, and Texas is very different from Washington, etc. So we've seen a big trend. We, in our businesses, we see a lot of demand from individuals actually coming to us saying, can you help us move to another country? So they take an EOR solution with them in their backpack and present it to their employer and go, look, I'm not happy in X location, or I'd like to move closer to my family or my parents, or I just need a bit of better weather. I want to leave the UK. It's too grey up in the north. I want to go to Portugal, or I want to go to Spain, or I want to go to Dubai. And some companies offer that flexibility. And I think as a talent retention tool, it's very interesting. We were in a seller's market a couple of years ago, so people had more leverage. We're now in more of a buyer's market, so the tables have turned a little bit, but nonetheless, it's a great way to source talent, but more to mobilize talent cross-border. So I think that's what I would say on that front.
Fascinating, and there's more to come on that type of legislation. I think once again, though, it all comes down to taxation, right? And so depending on the jurisdictions and how they feel about the scenarios, they are looking to recoup taxation. And so if you think about it that way, that usually that's where the legislation moves towards, to capture the payroll taxes and the income taxes within the jurisdictions,
Well, a
right?
good example of that is I read that Portugal had their highest social security receipts, taxation receipts ever last year. So we see a lot of migration to Portugal from other European countries. It's a beautiful country. It's got a lot going for it. It's very expat friendly, very nomad friendly, family friendly, great food, sun. So it's worked very well for them. And we see many other countries doing the same, following suit, because that attraction for talent and money to be spent in the local communities is very appealing. So actually, it's almost like a country by country talent war now. Who can get the highest quality developers and engineers? So things have changed, right? The dynamics have changed from US companies hiring in Silicon Valley to hiring elsewhere. And actually, we're seeing now a lot of startups starting in the Middle East and Europe. It's startup friendly. So it's another interesting trend, and we can talk about that.